Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Kel. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well.
It's a Saturday morning. We're sitting down at our computers. We have nothing better to do but talk about relationships. Once again, unrelating with Kel and Michelle. You've got really good guests today. Can you talk about who we're going to be talking to and what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm excited for our show as always. I know I always say that, but I like the show because the couple we have today has a unique perspective on how to structure a relationship. And what I mean by that is, when you decide to couple with someone, you have all of these kind of competing factors. So that's your needs, your partner's needs, and the relationship needs. And that can get messy when we come from a place of competition for all those needs being met versus interdependence, meaning we're all working together towards the same goals with the same values. And I particularly like this couple because there's an intentionality to what they've created for their family. Because, like in relationships, you can't just be along for the ride. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to be a passive participant in my relationship. You have to be more proactive in that. And that's something we talk about a lot in our shows. So this is a couple who figured out some things that I think are going to be helpful for other couples as well.
Sounds great. I'm excited. Let's do this.
Let's do this.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle, and I'm one of your hosts, Kelly. With me is my co-host, Michelle, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been providing individual and couples therapy for over a decade. Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships, why we do what we do, and what causes people to unrelate.
We're sitting down today with Ian and Sue from Michigan. Ian and Sue, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So like Michelle said in the intro, the secret to any great relationship is starting by building a solid foundation. Our two guests today have done just that. So Sue, maybe start us off by just introducing yourselves.
We're Sue and Ian, and we've been married for almost 39 years. We have a very loving relationship, and we have 3 children, all grown now. And I'd say our relationship has had its ups and downs over the years, but we've always tried to keep it on the straight and narrow, and feel at this point in our lives that we look at our 3 kids each with successful relationships, and feel very grateful to be where we are today.
Few regrets.
Yeah. And how did you two meet?
We had a mutual friend at the University of Michigan where I was still attending, and Ian had already graduated and moved along. And through this mutual friend we met, and our whole relationship between courtship and marriage was long distance, 4-hour car drive away.
Between Dayton, Ohio and Ann Arbor, Michigan, pretty much.
Yeah.
So you guys have that unique perspective of a long distance relationship where you had to start at the very beginning with communication.
True.
Yeah.
And long distance phone rates. 25 cents a minute.
We also both got to know I-75, between Michigan and down through Ohio really, really well. And Sue did the drive more than I did because it was easier for us to get together in Dayton while she was in school than in, her school facilities. So
I asked this of everybody who has had a long marriage, and being married myself, Michelle's married as well. We're always interested in learning, from other people who have had success. But what, in your opinion, what has been the secret to your success?
Well, lots of things. You're looking at me now, so that's good. I'd say lots of things, but shared values and a shared vision, I think, are the two most important. Having a set of mutual expectations and standards, and not being afraid to put those things in writing and revisit them constantly. Being governed by principle, not emotion. That's not to say we don't value emotion and our compassion, and we share movies together and we cried together, but that doesn't mean that that's the best way to make good life-changing decisions. And so, back after we'd been married for 10 years and we had kids, we put together really solid principles and values and made sure that we were in lockstep on them, and we've lived by them ever since. And I think that's the key. And I learned the importance of that by managing organizations in business. Is that, the fastest way to have breakdowns is to make sure, the fastest way to have breakdown is to avoid having a good vision, shared values, and shared expectations. And so if that's the case, then if you want to make a relationship work, you probably ought to work on those things.
It's almost like having like a company having a mission statement, right?
Yes, exactly. In fact, we put together a family mission statement way back
I
when.
love that.
And that was the start of that process.
Whose idea was that?
Well, it was mine from my business training.
That's actually a really great idea.
See, to some it seems too formal and too routinized, but it's not. I mean, it really is good fences make good neighbors, and the same is true of marriages. So if you are inclined, for example, to get into an emotionally charged issue that comes up over and over again because of some point of difference, if you establish standards for how you are going to navigate that, when the issue comes up, you appeal to the standard instead of the emotion in the moment. And you avoid any kind of an escalating process that often comes from not just the issue itself, but from outside stresses. So as soon as you have a common set of expectations and standards, you remove all that potential tension.
Something we talk about a lot on the show is intentionality, is actually being proactive in your relationship and what that even means and what that looks like. And I love when you talk about that, of creating a plan together, which is the important part, where everybody's on board and has agreed to the terms ahead of time, because it does take the guesswork out, and it does ground you in some kind of structure in those emotional times when your brain does not want to, think about things in the most effective or healthy way.
Well, particularly when you first have kids, there are a lot of stresses that come externally at the relationship, not just from the kids themselves, but outside pressures that, just trying to navigate everything and make it all work. And so when you have all those external pressures, it's all the more important to have all the as you say, the proactive ducks lined up, so that you don't create stresses of your own on top of the things that you can. In the end of the day, every human being is trying to develop agency, whether that's in the physical world or the human world. And the better that you create agency, the better sense of you have of what you can control and what you can't. And that seems to me the key to avoiding a lot of the stresses that you have. You accept the things you can't control, and you do your best to shape and massage the things you can.
I love the idea of a mission statement for a relationship, though.
Yeah.
It also helped to guide our parenting as well as time went on, because, as parents, you want to try to support each other and, be a united front in terms of approaches with your kids and be consistent. And so having planned out, knowing jointly, what those values were, was very helpful in terms of, whether it was discipline or questions about approaches and how to deal with certain things with the kids, we could almost anticipate what the right approach or the right solution would be, based on these values that we had developed together.
Isn't it crazy how, like you said, Ian, like we're not taught any of this? And in particular, when we talk about romantic relationships, there's been such a, no pun intended, romanticized message about couples is like, it should just be about feelings and romance and, be along for the ride. And it's just crazy to me that we don't consider romantic relationships on the same level as we do any other type of relationship in our life, where you do have to collaborate and communicate and talk about things that aren't sexy or romantic. And this is why, premarital counseling exists. So you'll talk about things like money and sex and all the things that you're like, oh, I don't want to have to talk about that. I just want to feel my feelings. And it's so interesting that because I think it's uncomfortable for people. And when we're not comfortable, we avoid to have these conversations, right? So I wish that we could
I think
establish
feelings and passions will get you through the first 2 years.
Right.
But they don't, and too many people get married in that period of time on the basis of feelings and passions and don't think about, all the mechanics that you've got to put together over the years. And, even having conversations about, like you said, money, but even more importantly, how many kids do you want to have and those kinds of things. I think that those of us who had leadership training are really, really fortunate because there's very little difference between leading an organization and making a marriage work. That the principal difference, if there is one, is that in a marriage or a really close relationship, you have to figure out how to be your own leaders, and you have to do it as peers instead of in a hierarchical sense. That, in fact, makes it harder than it is to lead an organization especially because people aren't trained in it.
Yeah, people forget the marriages work. Like you get into it for all the right reasons, but then once you get comfortable, I think that's where you get lazy sometimes, and you just take people for granted. Your spouse, and that's where you need to really sort of start doing it. A hard look at your. Yeah.
A real eye opener for us, I would say, occurred about 10, 12 years into our marriage. When we realized that and particularly when things got, hectic with kids, is that you realize that you can very easily assume that your partner's needs are the same as your own. And I talk to a lot of people about this stuff, and it's very, very common. And so people are delivering on the needs for the other that they think they want, and vice versa. And too often it misses the mark, and that's a source, I think, of major problems in marriages and often breakdowns. It's not getting over that hurdle. Right?
So what do you do?
Well, I think that's where the shared vision and shared values come in, and serious conversations about what is important to you about this relationship. See, when you put let's suppose that you independently with your partner, you list 10 values that are most important to you, right? The other person, your kids, your social life, your physical fitness, right? All those kinds of things. And then you do that independently, and then you put those two lists together, and you realize, well, they're all in different order. You put a premium on this, and I put a premium on that. And if you're serious about your relationship, you navigate those things that are important into the same order. I think this is of higher importance. You think this is of lower importance. How about if we elevate your value on this, and we'll elevate my value on this, and let that be our standard. And I think, of course, the most important thing is to put the value of the relationship first, because everything else depends on that. And too many people are serving their parents or serving their kids, and then, their relationship is fourth or fifth on the list, and then they get everything they deserve. and it
I love
crumbles.
that. And I love how tangible this is, because Kelly and I talk about, this whole marriage is work concept, and how this podcast, we're trying to break down what does that mean and what do we do? Like, what are some steps to take? Because the marriage is work idea, you're giving us tools. So the work means making a mission statement. The work means, figuring out where the hierarchy of your values are. And I'm just championing you right now, because that's what I think is
Yeah,
important.
that's
Is
right.
not just the
Yeah.
the what's happening, but the what can we do to move forward with it. And Sue, I had a quick
If anything,
question.
that there were, if anything, there were better books on this subject back in the 90s than there are today. And some of that stuff has fizzled out. Even the old Franklin planner concept, if you remember that, which was, I think, championed by Benjamin Franklin, had a lot of good ideas in it. And I think a really good base start for people is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because he builds a foundation for relationships in that as well, and and really really gets into the concept of interdependence, right? And interdependence is when you graduate from independence, and we are, in our culture, we're too often raised to assume that, well, we're dependent and we've got to work like hell to become independent. And when we're in, the independence is the highest good. Well, it's not. I mean, independent relationships are ships passing in the night. They aren't really, they aren't really about building a unit where your main focus is investing in each other instead of yourself, and that's the difference.
Yeah, can you do a little bit more of a deep dive on what does interdependence mean to the two of you?
I think it's really looking at the give and take in our relationship, such that I have consideration for what's important to him, and vice versa. And we make that a priority to each other.
Yeah, so a relationship that is not interdependent is a navigation around self-interest. Well, I'll take care of your self-interest if you take care of mine. It's kind of transactional, and it's also a battle over who's going to sacrifice for this or for that. But when you sit down and you build a shared vision and shared values, you start from the framework that we aren't two independent entities, we are a joint entity, and that we are no longer going to satisfy our self-interest in the context of what we want solely. We are going to satisfy our self-interest through what we can build jointly. And so I think that is the shift. And I think one of the great things kids do is they help you get in that mindset, because you can't hold an infant without realizing that, it's not about just you anymore, that it's really about the investment. I give an example in in some of the groups that I lead about, imagine that you create a list of the 10 or 20 most important people in your life. And then you get up each morning, and your frame of reference is to go down that list and figure out what you can do to invest in each one of those people during the course of that day. And what you find if you try and do that, two things happen. The people who are really, really worthwhile building interdependent relationships with start investing back in you. And so you get a cumulative and perhaps even an exponential effect. And the people who aren't don't respond, and they find their way off the list, and you replace them with somebody else. And next thing you know, you create a life for yourself where you're building all these wonderful relationships where there's a great deal of mutual investment, and everybody realizes that their time is better spent investing in others than it is themselves, because of the return you get. And you don't do it on a you don't look at it as a transactional, quid pro quo thing. You start with, what can I do for somebody else?
Yeah, what does investing look like when you say that? Like, I'm just trying to think of my friends and what.
Well, I think on the basic level, it starts with listening, right? And just listening to what other people need, sensitivity to their struggles. It is about, identifying what their needs are and trying to satisfy them, and not assume that their needs are the same as your own. Right?
And what I would add to that
this
is being present. Sorry, Ian, I just wanted to add to your list.
No, and the interesting thing about this is that it applies to your relationships with communities, right? It is that if you really want to build a great community, you invest, you figure out how you can volunteer, and you invest in the community. And if you set a tone for doing that and other people do the same, next thing you know, that you're part of a community that is really, really, really looking at how best to serve the people in it, as opposed to going into the community and saying, what can I take from it?
Yeah.
So that's my best explanation of interdependence.
That's fantastic. Michelle, you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting, in how we aren't taught at a very young age how to build relationships, right? It's just not something that we are inherently taught. I think we learn from our parents, we learn from other role models. But I guess my question, and that's kind of, I guess, I look at my parents and their struggles and their successes and their failures, and those certainly have been, have played a part in who I've become as a partner, as a person. But I guess my question is to you two is how has your mission statement, how has your relationship affected your kids, and now seeing them grow older, what is that relationship like with them? And are they practicing the same sort of mission statement rules, or are they kind of learning from you two? And if so, what is that like? What is that dynamic like for you?
I think they're still early days with that. Their relationships are such that they're still navigating, in their early days, and perhaps haven't come to more of a realization and involvement of how to get to the optimum. When I think about the time where it was the biggest struggle for us was around the birth of our second child. Not, the first was certainly an adjustment, but the second was even more so. And balancing it and juggling that, and Ian had made a mention of like the 10 to 12 year mark. Well, for us, we married young. We didn't have kids until 8 years after we were married. So when he talks the 12-year mark is when the second child was born.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we had a lot of time to grow together, before kids, and also get, financially stable and get to know each other really well before we had kids. But our struggle was around the second one, and it was really around that time frame that we worked towards putting the governing values together to be able to have a more just a happier home life, and a more open-minded approach to the future.
Yeah, I married her because she's rational. And I didn't find many women out there that were at the time, and especially this was in my early 20s. That's not to say there aren't, And I think that's the with our kids, it's very, very difficult to spoon feed this to anybody. They have to really want it and see a need, and it's also hard to necessarily turn to your parents for it. We try and set an example, and we try and offer. Little snippets along the way, and when we're asked, we offer ideas. But I think that I think people have to grow into it. And what I talked about, the same way somebody who is in their, early years, let's say adolescent, don't really understand what independence is because they're in a state of dependence. It is really hard for people who do not have kids and who are do not have a fully mature brain, which matures in your late 20s or around 30, to really understand and appreciate the benefit of interdependence. I think you grow into it in life. If we could impart interdependence into a 5-year-old, wonderful, but it can't happen because it's part of your process of growth and finding out who you are, where you fit, and how to make your relationships work. So even if you wanted to teach it to somebody, they have to be ready. And one of the things that makes an interdependent relationship work is you have to have more to offer somebody else than you want for yourself out of a relationship. So as long as you're needy, you will attract people who are needy, and you will be in what Michelle well knows is a codependent relationship where you're trying to extract what you can from the relationship instead of thinking about what you can invest in.
And I think, Ian, another thing you're talking about is just how much time it takes to deprogram any dominant narrative. And this one, particularly in the society we live in, that's individualistic, to chip away at all the messages you have gotten your whole life about needing to focus on yourself and be your own person.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're in a relationship and the relationship takes precedent over each individual. And that's very hard for some people to adjust to.
Yeah, I think that culturally, it's not just about being individualistic. We tend to be sucked into one of two narratives. The one is what I call is the argument for self-sacrifice, which is if you want to make a relationship work, you have to go in prepared to sacrifice a piece of yourself. And the other one is what I call the argument for personal liberty, which is, everybody's entitled to their autonomy and their right to make decisions that are in their own interest. And the truth is that we are both self-interested, and we are also interdependent social beings, and that the best solutions navigate the two of those things, right? And that's why, and the way to do that is the structure, because when you create the structure and the joint vision, you navigate a way around competing interests, so that you're no longer fighting over one set of self-interest and another. You have a solution that integrates the two. I can add to that. It's very interesting in relationships. There's some great books on this subject. Is that these two narratives, these arguments, the argument for self-sacrifice and the argument for personal liberty, create an interesting phenomenon in that we are often attracted to somebody who's in the other camp. Mm-hmm. And so, this creates relationships between narcissists and codependents, and a pattern that people stay in sometimes their whole lives through multiple relationships and whatever, and they don't know why they're in that pattern. They go into relationships thinking they've got to sacrifice, and the other guy, usually the man, but not always, goes into the relationship and says, I've married this woman because she'll sacrifice herself to my interest.
Yep.
What? And that is, there are many marriages last a lifetime and make that work, but it isn't the healthiest of arrangements.
So earlier you mentioned, and I want to go back to that, like around year 12 to 15, with the birth of your second child, there were some struggles. I mean, I'd love to know, just for my own curiosity, what was going on at that point that was creating those struggles? I mean, what was? Can you maybe explain a little further so people can understand, get some context, and why, and then why that then obviously started the conversation about the mission statement. So what was going on back then?
Well, I think with any family with children, it just, usurps so much of your time trying to figure out how to be meet all the needs of your kids while you're still working, to give the proper attention needed to each of the things that are part of your circle of life. And extended family involved. We were very fortunate to have grandparents that were happy to babysit for us. And I think it was more, just trying to strike the right balance of having the right amount of time for the family, having the right amount of individual time to be able to go off and pursue an individual interest separate from the family as well. And it was really primarily about trying to strike the right balance across all the different competing factors going on in our life at that time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Did you
Those
find yourself
disjointed values, whether or not you put them in writing, they exist under the surface
right? So if
in
people
every
are thinking,
relationship.
I'm just curious, do you feel like you were reacting in a different way? I know when we had our second, and you're introducing a newborn and a toddler, and as you're talking about life, I was more reactive. I was more sleep deprived. I didn't react. I didn't respond to my partner in the ways that I would normally do under other circumstances. So I was a different version of myself at the time too. And I think it's how did you recognize that happening at all? And, how was your communication about how you guys were each handling the stress of it all?
Yeah, I think that was definitely part of it. Thinking about it now, boy, that's a long time ago for
Yeah.
us. Hard to remember a lot of the specifics of the struggles, other than just having the thoughts that that was sort of a tipping point or progression point in our relationship, knowing that we needed to take some more considerations of each other and work through things in order to come out stronger on the other side.
So you mentioned, Michelle, and I think it's spot on about being reactive versus proactive, right? Mm-hmm. And so certain situations in your life, having infants around and also having squabbling siblings that you're responsible for, put you in a very reactive mode. And so what you really want is all the tools at your disposal to be able to shift from being reactive to proactive. The more, the more order and consistency and predictability that you introduce into the environment doesn't just help your relationship as parents, but it also does the same for the kids. And that's not to say you want order at all costs or you want to be an authoritarian. I'm not advocating for that at all. But to try and create predictability, and because predictability is where you get to the point of knowing what you can control and what you can't, and that's true for it's as true for an adult as it is for a 2-year-old. Right? The 2-year-old is very often instinctively trying to figure out how they can impart some control over their environment and get their needs met in the same way. So I think it was Nathaniel Brandon said, kids need to know that somebody's flying the plane. I really like that.
Yes, I love that.
So do I.
And I think too, the other thing you guys are talking about is having these conversations in times of stability. When I see people as a therapist who are dealing with things like depression or anxiety, it's so much more difficult when you're in the emotions of it and in the feelings of it to create the tools. That's not the optimal time to create the tools. It's when you are in a feeling of stability and safety and predictability, like you're talking about, Ian, or even preventatively. If your relationship is going well, it would still apply to have these conversations and set these things in place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I take that mindset to my relationships with my kids, to my relationships with really close friends who I share a lot of time. and it isn't always put in writing, but it's still the framework. It's the same framework. If you understand what to expect of each other, then you have a basis to build on and to course correct when things aren't going exactly right, or if there's a misunderstanding or what have you. So I'm in a stage where I'm trying to convince my kids that emotions are not always reliable. And I think that's a really, really important hurdle to get over in life, because when we're young, that's pretty much all we have, because that's kind of the way our brains are wired. And to really build these kinds of cognitive processes that we're talking about, like Michelle said, is hard work. And it really takes application, and it takes a maturity to get to that point. And when you don't have it, what you have is you rely on your emotional sense of what you like and what you don't like, what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And there's so many things in life that feel good that aren't good for you, and things that are good for you that don't feel good. And the only way you learn to value those things and make them priorities is to really, really, really get to study what's in the interest of human well-being, and not just default to what feels good in the moment or what makes sense. And all bad life decisions are made on emotions, in my judgment.
I always get people's advice, okay? Because honestly, this is a journey we're taking. We're all kind of taking the same journey, just different paths. And I'd just be curious. You mentioned the mission statement. What advice would you give people like myself who are still early in their journey? How would I create my own? How would we, myself and my wife, create our own mission statement?
Well, I think it starts by sitting down and talking about what kind of environment you want to create. I really do think that even though Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is pretty basic, it makes you think about some really important questions like, what is the end in mind, right? So where do you want your family to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, etc. He raises the question in that book. I think it's a very powerful question. What do you want it to say on your tombstone? Right? Really, what do you, even beyond your relationship, what do you want your life to stand for? And that is not just you, but what value do you want to impart on the world around you?
And that's actually something I ask my couples in practice is, if this doesn't work out, because, you're coming to me obviously for couples therapy, there's a chance if this doesn't work out, what's going to be the story about why it didn't work out? Let's talk about the reasons the story you're going to tell about, well, the relationship ended because blah, blah, blah. Help me understand what the blah, blah, blah is. And it really helps people, like you said, hone in on what the issues are, first of all. And then realign themselves to say, well, wait, maybe it doesn't have to end that way if we do X, Y, and Z instead.
Yeah, I think the interesting concept, and this is, again, it's similar to anything you want to accomplish in your life, is that you can't create the life you want or the relationship you want unless you can first envision that relationship and sit down and figure out how to get there. And you don't do that by yourself. You do it with whoever is invested in that. If it's an organization, you do it with all the people in the organization, right? Even as somebody as young as a 5 or 6 year old you can start asking the question about what do you want from this family experience? What works well? What doesn't work well, right? And you can get their input as well as your spouse's input.
That reminds me, the fact we did do family meetings, with the kids back in the day when they were younger, to try and discuss, concerns within the family, how we should all approach a certain issue together. What's everybody's opinion on it? Let's determine, as a family, let's figure out how we want to deal with something.
And how to resolve conflicts,
Right.
and how you resolve conflicts amongst yourselves without necessarily needing your parents to step in.
Was that
But
a
if you are-
democracy,
sorry,
or what, how are the? How,
No,
Yeah.
I don't. So I don't think so, and I think that there are that there the idea that I've been talking about structure, I think is critically important to understanding why the best organizations and the best governments are representative democracies, because you want to give everybody a say, but you don't want everybody to have equal decision making, right? Because
Right.
you really want the people who are flying the plane to make the decisions, but the more you engage those who are on the plane, the more likely they are to be committed to the cause, to to feel like they're part of it, and to be invested in it. But yeah, there are too many families I've seen where the kids run the household, and that's not the answer.
True.
Right?
But
Especially if there are enough of them to outvote the parents.
Yeah, agreed. But if you're a child that grows up in a family environment where you have a voice, you are more likely to be an adult in a relationship that will use their voice, that will see value in
Yeah,
speaking
I agree.
up. And yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Michelle, I want to see you have a family meeting with your 3 girls and see how that goes.
Well, I
Cookies or
can
no
already
cookies,
predict. Yeah, I was gonna say I can predict it will involve dessert of some kind. That seems to always be the negotiation. I was gonna say I completely agree with Ian. It's a matter of saying, like, what is your opinion on this? We ask them, how do you feel about this, and what would you like to see happen, and then make sure they know that the ultimate decision is between their dad and I. And taking all into account, and then also helping manage expectations, because that's another part of all relationships, is like, just because you said what you want, you're not going to get what you want. Is really important.
So
too.
we did another thing that surprises people, and really to that point is, right, so if you have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, the opinion you ask for the 5-year-old and how you take that information is very different than a 10-year-old, and 15-year-old, yet again, another layer of differences. One of the things that we did that was quite interesting, that others have followed our lead on when they found out we did it, is when it came to driving age and dating age, which happened at about the same time, we actually wrote contracts with our kids that set expectations, that made clear the understanding. And one of the things I recommend is early on not allowing kids to have their own car, because when you hold the keys, you held some control in the expectations, right? But you can still, if those expectations are met, you can still give as much freedom to the child as if it were their own car. But when it's their own car and they have their own keys, your ability to take that back is made a lot tougher. And so the contract basically said, this is what we expect. And, you're getting this amazing privilege to have a car to go everywhere you want. But initially, when you get there, we want a phone call that you've arrived. We want to know you're leaving and coming home, and those kinds of things. And that worked very well. And, particularly with the girls, we wanted to know who they were with and what kind of atmospheres they were in, and that kind of thing.
When I think back to my parents getting me an old used Honda Prelude when I was 16, I think, look back, that's crazy. I cannot believe they did that, knowing what I know now. I
know. I need a copy. I need a template of that contract, because I am absolutely going to utilize that.
Another great,
Sorry, Ian, you're also talking about transparency, which I love, because that's the other thing. And I know we're getting into parenting versus couples, but is letting kids know that you're taking it seriously. So sometimes I don't know a yes or no right away, but if I say, like, I'm actually going to take that into consideration, I'm going to think about it, and then I can give you an answer later, and then give the reasons why I came to my decision, that are age appropriate depending on the request. But the transparency of it all, both before the before and after is so helpful.
Yeah, and when we presented the contracts, it wasn't this is the contract. If it was, what do you think of this contract, and how would you change it if you before you agree to it? And that kind of give and take can occur. You may not agree to everything that the child wants when they elect to change it, but I think it puts in their mindset the kind of commitments and responsibilities that they're going to have to take on for their whole lives as well. That when you go to work for somebody, right? When you buy a house, you sign a mortgage, all those kinds of things. So it's a life step, and relationships with kids are as important as relationships with spouses, really. So the paradigm I would offer relative to raising kids is to always recognize that responsibility and freedom are on intersecting continuum, and that you earn your freedom with responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you become you earn you become more responsible as you're given more freedom, and so both of those things are the case. And when you recognize they go hand in hand, if growth is managing those two things together.
So when you drew up this contract, I'm assuming it's a physical contract with the kids?
One page in most cases. Yeah.
And they show their
Usually,
lawyers?
No. six or 8 key points that says that this is what you're going to do.
And they sign the contract. So after they sign the contract, how does that go? Like what are the next steps? When did they eventually get access to a car, I guess, or for a good example?
They had access to a car at age 16 the same way you did.
Okay.
It just wasn't it just wasn't their car, and
it was the family car.
It was the family car, and the mom and dad had the keys. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted the keys, you had to ask for them. You had to provide the reason. You had to say where you were going, right? And you probably had to have certain things done around the house as well, if they were your responsibility. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I got a car, actually. Now I had to think back. I needed a car because I had so many things going on. I had a job, I had sports, I had school. You know what I'm saying? I think that's probably why I had it. Yeah.
That's the same reasons for us. In fact, we lived 7.5 miles from the high school, right? Because we had every incentive to give our kids the keys to go to high school, especially if they had an after-school event or whatever. But we made many trips back and forth to the high school ourselves in the interest of principles, safety, discipline, and all those things, right? So.
No, I think that's great. I admire that. I think it's really smart. It's smart parenting is what it is. I mean, and it's responsible parenting.
Well, some people would say it's it's too strict. Not enough freedom for the kid, but look around you and see how many kids get in real trouble in between, mm-hmm. 16 and 20, and largely because of cars, because of alcohol, and any number of other things. And you only get one chance, right, to make such a huge mistake that can have an impact on the rest of your life. And we did get pushback from our kids that, a lot of their peers got to do things that they didn't get to do. But they're all pretty well off today. So,
look, I read somewhere that Bill Gates wouldn't let his kids use social media at all.
Interesting.
And I find that really interesting coming from a guy like that. So that really sends a message, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we really never had to deal with that. Well, although initially our kids got cell phones purely for communication with us and nobody else. They had cell phones for our convenience, the parents, not their convenience. But that was before there was the big proliferation of young kids having cell phones these days as well, and so much social media.
And we also had a policy with our kids that there was only TV there was no TV in the house Monday through Thursday nights. Regardless of whether you got your homework done or not, because your siblings may not have their homework done. And we told this to some friends of ours who were an Indian couple, and the next thing you know, we heard that they told a bunch of people in India this, and dozens of people have adopted our idea in India. So it's nice to be able to make an impact.
Could I make that rule with my wife? You think it would work?
No.
Just kidding.
Well, I think you're making an impact today.
It's definitely a much bigger challenge for parents today than with all of the electronics and social media that there is. That much of that we were early and didn't have to deal with a lot of that.
So were we. I'm so happy about that.
Yeah.
Our goal is for all of that social media to burn out and not exist by the time ours are teenagers, but I feel like it's only going to be worse. I know.
But maybe maybe there's room for a social media contract as well, and like there was cars back then. Not
necessarily social media, but phones and social media.
Yeah, what kind of contracts do you think if you're Ian and Sue, if your kids were, let's just say, I don't know, 10 or 8, what kind of contracts do you think you would have to maybe think about now?
Well, probably social media and cell phones would be two to come to mind.
Yeah.
That'd be tough. Because all the kids at school are doing it.
It's tough on kids. The reason it's tough is not because it's unreasonable. It's because all the kids' peers don't have the contract. That's why it's tough. But interesting thing is, when the kids buy in and they understand the reasons, they build strength of character and make the same arguments to their friends. I remember driving home with my 3 kids one time from their cousin's house, where their cousins had all the latest and greatest video games. And played incessantly. And when they went to visit, they enjoyed playing those video games as well. But one day on the way home in the car, and I forget, I think it was Lucy, said, I understand why we don't have all these video games in our house. And that would probably be another one that has contract potential, right? Is how many hours are you permitting yourself to play video games, and what kind of video games are you going to play? What are you exposing yourself to would be another really, really good example. What
sort of epiphany did she have at that time?
I think she realized that she'd spent 3 or 4 hours at a get-together on video games, and that really probably that while she was playing, it felt good, but driving home in the back seat of the car, that it probably really wasn't the best way to have spent her time.
Yeah.
It wasn't really... The question I always ask my kids is, at the end of whatever you do, and, we all need our little checkouts and our escapes and our, anxiety reducers and whatever, we do all these things. But at the end of the day, we should always ask ourselves, how did I spend my day and what value did I create? And if you do that, you'll realize that if you spend your whole evening playing video games or drinking at the bar, you probably won't be able to answer that question constructively at the end of the night.
Yeah. She probably wasn't connecting with her cousins either.
Well, right. I mean, it's so, it's so different than if you were engaged in conversation, right?
Yeah, or playing games outside or something, running around. Right. Or exactly. Playing Monopoly, learning about money.
Monopoly Deal we were talking about. Our kids play Monopoly Deal together quite a lot. And the other interesting thing is, while other kids were out when they were in college at different times, other kids might be out partying and going crazy. Our kids were very often on, webcam talking to each other on a Friday night, and we considered that some measure of success. That's how they preferred to spend Friday night, even if they were off at college and one of them was at home and what have you. So, sometimes 2 of them, sometimes all 3 of them together.
Oh.
Yeah. I find this fascinating. I know it's not really about relationships, but it's about life.
Well, it is about relationships.
Right.
It is.
But,
it is.
If you want to make a relationship work, the best way to do it is create harmony in your household through whatever means. because that's the thing that undermines it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not, I want to say again, it's not authoritarian. People could easily interpret some of the things I'm saying as authoritarian. It's only authoritarian if it's my way or the highway, as long as you're involved in the decisions that affect you and have some say, and it's proportional to your age. I don't think it's authoritarian. It's representative government.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that undermines relationships is making assumptions, which you've very clearly outlined. If you are proactive in creating structure in your household and in your couple, then it reduces the amount of assumptions you need to or can make.
Well, the nice thing about structure is it can be fluid, right? So everything you do in the world of your experience with relationships, whatever, starts with an interaction, right? I interact with Sue. I can in my own mind create a science experiment around that interaction, and I can say to myself, okay, if I try this with Sue, am I going to get the outcome I think I'm going to get, right? And if I do, then great, I should do more of it, and especially if she gives me positive feedback. But if it doesn't work, then I ought to try a different interaction the next time. That applies to your kids, that applies to your neighbor across the street, whatever. And so often our approaches to relationships create the very problems we have in them, and we don't improve upon those approaches.
This has been a master class in relationships. Well, look, I think this has been fantastic and really, really eye-opening in many ways for me.
Well, I just want you guys to know one of the things I love about Kelly more than anything is his sincerity, and he's very thoughtful, and he's going to go do this. I know it. He really takes the things we talk about here and really tries to apply them. And
I admire you guys for doing this. It's pretty easy for us to participate. It's very, very difficult for you guys to try and take on what you're doing and trying to reach the right people. And there is a really serious need out there for these kinds of discussions. And the trick, I think, is to create the right kind of forums where that people will find and feel comfortable with, or whatever it is. So, therapy is a wonderful thing, right? But there are too many people out there who can benefit from it that are, might be afraid of it, or might not want to admit that they go, or whatever. So creating the equivalent of that in an accessible way that somebody can get to in the privacy of their own home is a very, very valuable thing to do. And even better if, we can create the mechanisms of addressing the need before the problems arise. I think that's really powerful. So.
Yeah, and I think you've talked about investing in people and in things, and that's what we're hoping is that people will think, well, if I invest my half hour, my hour into this episode, I'm going to walk away with something that I can really use in my relationships.
Well, thank you, you two. I really appreciate it. I mean, hopefully you've enjoyed this as much as we have.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. So, and you guys are doing the right thing. So we're always happy to support the right thing, whatever that is. Let's all make the world a better place.
I agree.
I like that plan.
Well said.
If you're struggling with family, friends, or coworkers, in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, or want a relationship and to set yourself up for success, then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating. Just drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com to be our next guest.